Vampires, werewolves, ogres, trolls, dragons, and hellhounds. These are just
Zombies.
Zombies,
Ghost children.
ghost children. These are just a few of the things that go bump in the night. Sarah, we need to talk about monsters.
Yes, we do, because monsters say a lot about who we are as people and societies.
But before we get into the monsters, let's welcome them to the show. Welcome to the Thing About Witch Hunts. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack-o'-lantern.
Yay! Another kind of a monster. In certain stories, the jack-o'-lantern is a monster. Or the jack-o'-lantern is part of a monster.
Yes.
Yeah, like you were saying, monsters do really reveal a lot about our own selves, our societies and cultures. They reflect our fears and our own unwanted desires.
Fear. That's something we talk a lot about on the Thing About Witch Hunts and the Thing About Salem. What happens because of fears? So, what happens if we fear ourselves? We make monsters.
We do. We fear monsters. We fear they exist. We fear they're coming for us. They look scary. They act in intimidating and frightening manners. They speak spookily and with intimidating, sometimes booming voices or cackling.
They're untrustworthy. They're full of trickery. And they love to scam and make dirty deals.
They do. They love to scare. They can punish us. They intersect with our deepest anxieties, our cherished values, our repressed desires, and our greatest hopes.
Monsters.
So, what even is a monster? I think we all really know. It's a frightful or grotesque imagined or fictional creature, something that's been invented through myth or legend or just storytelling. It could be in a movie or a comic or a book. They're everywhere, all around us, all the time. I see several behind Sarah.
Yes, some of my very favorites. Just a few. I have more, but I guess you could call them my poppets. But if you don't like those, you can just look at my little pumpkins that I grew.
Yes,
Not
pumpkins
scary
you grew in your
pumpkins.
own backyard.
I did. That's a
Less
tiny, tiny
scary.
little one, too.
Yeah, it's not as
So-
scary as that other jack-o'-lantern guy I see behind you.
No, that belongs to a very scary monster. One of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the word monster comes from the Latin monstrum, which itself comes from monstrare, which means to show, to point out, or to demonstrate, and from moneo, which means to warn, advise, admonish, or remind. So monsters are warnings and admonitions that demonstrate negative aspects of society and warn us about what could go wrong if we stray from society's boundaries. And monsters often prefigure societal problems. They arise at points of societal stresses.
Like what?
Like Godzilla comes
Oh, yeah.
from, stress and fear of atomic weapons, which themselves could be described as monsters. WMDs are monstrous.
And Jaws, because the tourism, they needed that tourism, and they were so afraid that something was going to mess it up. And what happened? A giant hungry shark shows up.
Yes, it's their anxiety made manifest. It's a physical embodiment of our fear and anxiety.
Sometimes animals are monsters, like Jaws.
So where do monsters come from, Sarah?
Well, the big sharks come from deep, deep down in the ocean. But all the other ones are invented by people through myth, legend, folklore, fiction, and conspiracy theories.
That's one of the keys there, I think, that you mentioned, is they're invented by people. These are things, sometimes a monster could be a real animal, like a tiger that we say has developed a taste for blood. That can be a real living thing, but it's only monstrous because we make it monstrous and our fear makes it into more than it is.
And the other thing about these monsters that are man-made, they can evolve. Folklore and fiction, I was thinking about the monsters that, have evolved out of the story of Wizard of Oz over the last 100 years.
Oh, right. Definitely evolutions can come 100 years down the road, a few 100 years down the road. We still see Frankenstein's monster is evolving. There's new portrayals of that all the time. There's all kinds of stories about giants and all these monsters. They keep coming back. That's one of the hallmarks of a monster. You think you've got rid of it, but it comes back when society has that same need to fulfill through it.
Or if the box office wants another hit. And fans always love it. You just always hope. Did they leave that open? Well, now it seems like things don't necessarily need to be left open for a sequel because backstory can be created at any time.
And there's the prequel. So you can have the origin story of the monster that you love so much from the original hit movie.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So who and what do we find monstrous? There's a lot of different kinds of monsters out there. They can be supernatural, like demons and ghosts, or they can be natural, like a griffin. It's a combination of multiple natural animals. Sometimes these recombinations are what makes the things scary. You bring in all these enhanced qualities of all these different creatures and throw them together, and what you get is monstrous, truly frightening.
And some of the fears and the stories that have been told in witch trial records and accounts have some of these very scary combo monsters in them.
Yeah, a lot of the humanoid or animal-esque creatures that we call monsters are these combinations. There's the Minotaur, it's a bull and a human. The Sphinx, it's a lion and a human, and a griffin is a hybrid. And then you have other humanoids like Slender Man and cyborgs and space aliens that somehow have our shape, but very different qualities.
You mentioned monsters that have our shape, but what about humans who end up taking the form of an animal or a supernatural being? They lose their humanity and become a monster physically.
Some of my favorite monsters are people who become animals. Like growing up, I was always fascinated with the werewolf.
So the witch, the fictional witch, is one of these types of monsters.
The witch is often portrayed as being, a green person with a long hooked nose or other qualities that are so exaggerated that they don't look human anymore. But just any ordinary witch in a witch trial, an innocent person can be turned into a monster by throwing that label witch on them. That means that they're doing monstrous activities. And in European society, that meant that they were in league with the devil, who himself is like the monster of all time.
And I'll tell you what, when those Puritan ministers in the American colonies or governors were writing comments about the women convicted of witchcraft, they weren't saying how beautiful they were or, complimenting their extraordinary skills. They tried to dehumanize them and make them sound scary, harmful.
Yeah, that dehumanization, we'll circle back to that. So
Okay.
put a pin in it, everybody. Pin. We'll be right back to that. Sarah, I believe your favorite kind of monster is the kind that was once living and is living again.
That is absolutely right. The undead. In fact, I'm kind of disappointed that I forgot to bring my Daryl ear necklace down here to stick on the books as an Easter egg. I had meant to, but I love The Walking Dead. I love Night of the Living Dead. I love it anytime. I was so, delighted when there was a zombie in Hocus Pocus. I do love the undead. I love them fast. I love them slow. And I love watching stories, reading stories where people are trying to survive in a story with the undead. How do you avoid becoming their victim or becoming that monster? It's like Yeah, it's the ultimate monster. Human monster.
And yeah, and the zombie has become a staple of television and film and video games. Really, a lot of video games that aren't really specifically about zombies will put in a zombie mode just because people love like fighting off hordes of the undead. That really strikes a chord with people.
It sure does. I mean, how many years has the Walking Dead TV show been going? But how many comics were bought before that? That story has been going on for decades. Yeah.
That's very true. That one story. And it's definitely, you mentioned some other great zombie movies. It's not the only one.
No, it's not. There's always new ones. And yeah.
Yeah. Some of my favorite monsters are animals that may not exist. They occupy this liminal space on the edge of our knowledge of the wildlife of our planet. They're the cryptids. A lot of people believe that they're real. Other people, not so sure. But things like Yeti and Bigfoot and my favorite, Chupacabras, the goat sucker.
Those are awesome. Well, one of the earliest Bigfoot monsters that I could think of from like my childhood, of course, but he just wanted to eat and sit on the couch. But he was working the house. What's his name?
Are you talking about Harry and the
Yeah.
Hendersons?
Oh yes, Harry and the Hendersons. What a great one.
Oh,
What a
yeah.
great
That is
story.
a classic movie.
Whose main character dad actually becomes what a really, and actually more than one story later on, just a really monstrous character. But back to
He
Harry.
does.
What a fun what a fun monster.
What a fun monster. He was part of the family for a while until he had to go back to his own family.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah. But people
Family.
were hunting him like he was a monster.
That's so who's your favorite cryptid monster character?
Well, Chupacabras is my favorite. It's one, it strikes a lot of fear because it's a creature of the night, like many of our monsters are. You you don't see it. You hear your goat or your chicken, squealing in the night or squawking, and you run out to see what's going on. And by that time, the chupacabras is way gone. Nobody sees them. They're just in there. They kill all the chickens and the goats, and then they're gone. And they're very frightening, vicious, pointy teeth.
Awesome. One of my favorite monsters is when you don't realize it's a monster yet. It's that when you think it's just a regular animal or just, another community member, but it turns out, oh no, not even close.
Yeah. Once that dog starts talking to you and its eyes start glowing red, you know you've got to get out of there. And in this day and age, we also have digital monsters like creepypastas. We just did an episode about Slender Man, and he's one of the most well-known creepypasta monsters.
Yeah, and he's not even that old, but he was known so quickly. Like the news of the danger of Slenderman spread from two photographs that were fictional and known to be fictional.
He has that look that is so scary because he almost looks human, but then you realize he doesn't have a face and he's way too tall and skinny. It's very slender, and he's got tentacles that come out of his back. I mean, without the tentacles, it's just a tall human. It's Lurch in the woods. And you think, okay, I can go up and talk to that guy. And then those tentacles come out, and whoa,
You
not
just
talking to this guy anymore.
you just wrote a creepypasta story right there.
Yeah, he did. He saw Lurch in the woods and he turned out to be Slender Man and he killed you.
Yeah, good.
But often we make monsters out of real animals or real people. We can make monsters out of, you mentioned jaws and sharks before, lions, tigers, bears, wolves can be seen as monstrous.
I love and I know I need to do more research on this, but the Ghost in the Darkness, that film with the lions when they were trying to build a railroad in Africa. That of course that film is vintage now, but I was on the edge of my seat for that. I loved it and I've seen it a lot.
Yeah, that's spine chilling. It's again that thing of the darkness and these stealthy creatures that can just appear suddenly from nowhere almost.
And one of the things about monsters in that, even though it's just an animal monster, I remember the characters of that story were so, as it went on, they got more and more puzzled because seemingly innocent, saintly characters were getting gobbled up. Like, they're just, and monsters don't necessarily have a kill list. Sometimes they do, but sometimes, if they find you, you're dead. And that was an example of that. And I loved that feature of the story too. But that is a real aspect of monster lore. And I think that's one of the very scary things about Slender Man. Who is vulnerable? Who's vulnerable to the dangers of monsters? Everybody.
Everybody. Yeah, I also want to acknowledge that for many, many centuries, or probably thousands of years, there have been monsters terrorizing us on the deeps. Sea monsters. You see them in the old maps. There'll be sea monsters here, or in some cases, there'll be dragons here. But sea monsters were used to warn people from going to places that hadn't been explored because you didn't know what was in the unknown. You just didn't know. But sea monsters can turn out to be things like giant squid or giant octopuses.
The
The Kraken comes up and takes your ship down with it. Even though a whale like Moby Dick is a monster story. It's about a whale, and whales, we shouldn't think of whales as monsters really, but they can be in the right story. We also tend to monsterize humans. Villainous humans, supervillains in the comic books, but real villains in real life, serial killers are called monsters. You look at the Netflix series that's going on right now, they've got Monster, the Ed Gein story on there.
I'm on episode 5.
Oh, you're on episode 5 of the Ed Gein Monster.
I am.
Yeah, and didn't they do a Jeffrey Dahmer before that?
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
these series, demonstrating humans doing monstrous acts.
Yes. And I'm going to circle back to this too, because I don't want to lose what you just said. That is important, that they're doing monstrous acts. And so we label them as therefore being a monster. But is it appropriate to label humans as monsters? I mean, there's some people that are so reviled and do such terrifying, villainous, murderous things that can you say that they're not a monster? Think of people like Hitler and Stalin and all their murderous rampages.
So we say, should we be calling them monsters? So then why wouldn't we? Why would we just say that's the worst kind of human? Is there a name for the worst kind of human? It's only devil or monster. There's not a tier below that, I don't think.
No.
Bad boy, bad girl.
Yeah.
Bad dog.
Naughty dog, criminal, monster. It's like a progression
thug,
in how
thug.
we... Oh, thug, yeah. Definitely there and there. And witches are somewhere in there. And
so I think, the answer to that is we're going to, as a society, we can use that label to put them very far from the good people by putting them with the most scary concepts and threats.
It is. But what do we get out of isolating people in such a way, we're basically cutting them off from humanity at that point.
One of the things that I did when I was prepping for this chat was I was thinking about winning against monsters and monsters winning against humans. And that's a whole fun list we'll probably get to. But, I was realizing that there's this punishment aspect. Monsters are punishers, but we want to punish monsters and we want to punish our most vile transgressors in our societies. We take it into our own hands. That's where we get a witch hunt from, an actual witch hunt, because somebody is trying to punish an alleged witch. Yeah. So I just think of punishment. I think that's one of the reasons, because we're going to punish.
Mm-hmm. And punish them in such a way that makes them stand apart as monsters. People, you don't want to try this at home. You don't want to be like these folks.
Yeah.
So
make an
Yeah.
example, but we're also like, we take away their humanity in the way we recognize them, but then we're also taking, their punishment. They're losing their identity and their rights, and, they're not a part of society anymore. But they never, some of them, they actually never were. If they were in there sneaking around doing monstrous acts, they were never part of society.
That's a really good point. And the same with, centering in on the witch as a monster. This is what people expected from witches, that they're going to act so far apart from society, from human society. They're part of the devil's society, but they're not a part of our society. They're too different. They have no morals that, can be comprehensible to us. You can't understand the witch. You don't know where they're coming from. You just know that they want to be the opposite of the good person that everybody else in the community wants to be.
So we're accusing humans of being secret monsters.
Secret monsters, yes. People can act like your friend. They could be part of your family. And then they turn around and they cast a spell on you. Monsters. What do we get out of accusing the witches of being these secret monsters?
Retribution, and possibly the end of a threat.
That's very true, because I know in a lot of the witch trials, there were, like in the Salem witch trials, there were children who were sick and people couldn't figure out why they were sick. And so they decided that it was witchcraft that was making them sick. And what was the cure for witchcraft? Eliminating the witch. It wasn't more cowbell. It wasn't a simple fever. It was like you had to get rid of the source of the magic.
It's interesting, with the witch monster, like, we're not going around fearing that vampires are using the evil eye on us and that our aunt is becoming a vampire, so let's kill that vampire. Like, when you kill a vampire, it's a known vampire, like in lore or stories. But with a witch, often in these real life natural world situation witch hunts, there's no proof. You're never, you're alleging, you're not identifying anything. Whereas in folklore stories or fantasies, the witch is revealed too, just like a vampire. But a serial killer, they're identified. We know they are that. We're going to end what they're doing. We're going to restrict them. We're going to punish them. But accused witches, they're women, children, men. We're not proving that they're this witch monster by harming them.
True. We've talked about the monster as a mirror. It reflects our own reviled qualities, the repressed desires and wants that we have. A monster is like people, but it's different in some special way that identifies it, allows us to say that it's not a human. It has to be a monster to do such a monstrous thing. And like the monster is a reflection of individual people, it's also a cultural construct and a societal mirror, because society's fears and anxieties feed into the visions of monsters. It's what is fearing us that actually drives how we shape this, how we make a body for our fear.
And it gives us an opportunity to triumph over a fear, because possibly the monster's not going to win.
And we need that victory. That's something that we really crave and hunger for, victory over our fear, because then we can live in peace.
Yeah. And, when you think about groups of people that are feared, there's this conquering aspect. When they become the victims of persecution as a group, those persecuting are reveling in their triumph, that they're triumphing over a perceived monster.
Yeah. But how do they overcome a monster?
Oh, what a fun list. I just love looking at this. Well, there's hunting, obviously, because of witch hunts and other hunting, but you get to hunt.
Mhm.
You might have a special weapon for your hunt. Or maybe you're hunting for treasure to beat the monster with.
That's a good point. Yeah, you've got to outwit the monster. You've got to confront it. You've got to fight it head on. This is a premise in every horror movie, I think, that the hero of the movie has to actually take the monster on head on. You can't go around it. There's no running away. There's no hiding. You've got to directly confront the beast.
One of my, annual watches for Halloween has a little confrontation like that in a house, and has to do with my pumpkin sucker back there. But that is, the monster is there to punish the human in that case, but there's a showdown, and he's trying to overcome the monster.
Mm. It's an age old struggle, this man and woman versus monster.
When you're, watching a film, you're waiting to find their weakness. Are the victims going to find the weakness of the monster they're facing?
Yeah. Same in video games. When you get to the boss at the end of the level, you got to find its weaknesses. Do you hit it in the eye? Do you like target the hands? Do you have to go for the belly whenever it stands upright? You've got to find a weakness. Is it vulnerable to a stake through the heart? Is it vulnerable to a silver bullet? You often have to overcome a monster with some kind of extraordinary means.
And as we've seen from 1980s and earlier and a little later horror flicks, you're not going to outrun them, but you can try.
Yeah. You can try to join them.
That is a way of conquering a monster, is, changing teams. And in the witch trials, that's a transgression. Those who are being examined, that's what those magistrates are asking them, when did you betray us? When did you join the devil's team?
Yeah. And you can use magic against monsters. You can use charms. You can use incantations.
My personal favorite weapon is to not believe and not fear. That's one of my go-to. I always have that one in my pocket to pull out.
So not believing what you're seeing is the key to overcoming them.
Yeah. That's my favorite defense.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to go, you know, through back channels.
But there's so many stories, and I love these, where by the end, they are a believer. Like, that didn't work. The evil is like, let me show you what you have to be afraid. Yeah, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. But fighting against a monster can bring people together. It's a way in both in like a film, you see teams of neighbors band together to take on a threat. You see in real life, people identify, say, a monster, like, say, Nazis, and team up and go to war to defeat that enemy. And it's a way of getting society to stick together and band against the common enemy. It's like that in the movie Independence Day, when the space aliens come down to fight the whole Earth teams up and says, we're fighting back. This is our planet.
Yeah, I love stories where, one person has uncovered the conspiracy. Because uncovering a conspiracy is also a way to beat a monster. But what good is that if everyone around you is still buying the bluff, if they don't realize what's happening? So getting others to team up with you, that's a fun challenge in monster stories.
Yeah, definitely.
Tattling, like, I love it, in stories where there's the threat of revealing somebody's monstrous identity.
Right. Yeah, that can neutralize them. Yeah, you can also try to redeem a monster because we label things as monsters when we think that they can't be redeemed. But if you can find a way to do it and get them to come to some sense of peace or whatever it is, put away their violence, then you can defeat them that way. It's like hand Frankenstein's monster a flower and treat him nicely and see if he responds.
I love it. There's a fairy tale that I'm not going to be able to think of the name of it right now, but it's the Dragon movie with Millie Bobby Brown. I love that story because the beast, the dragon, has been lied to. And so she's seeking revenge and, murderous. And the princess is able to show her, like, this is actually what the history is. This is what happened. And then a princess teams up with a monster to beat the actual. bad guys. So many times there's a monster, but it's like a screen. There's somebody behind the curtain.
So you see a monster and fear it, but it's actually the humans that are really the monstrous ones.
Yeah. And I mean, isn't that in Oz?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's not a
basically.
wizard.
They
He's a
they
con.
figure him out. They uncover the conspiracy, they find his secret, and that causes him to collapse and he flees Oz.
Yeah. It's fun to flip the coin over and talk about how monsters win.
Oh, they have a lot of tricks up their sleeves, including tricking people, scaring people, lying to people. They do so many things.
Yeah. They infiltrate. There's been, like, I would say there's a huge wave of those movies and books coming out right now where it's an imposter infiltrating, this community or family. So that is definitely a way that monsters try to win against humans.
Speaking of human monsters, like serial killers, a lot of them use those kinds of infiltration tactics to befriend somebody or, act like they're a person that needs help themselves and they'll get under your radar and attack you when you're not expecting it.
Monsters win with poison. They poison.
Do or they can possess your spirit, your soul, body.
They, they are such bullies. Monsters do not relent. You have to keep looking over your shoulder or keep running or keep trying. That's the best in stories with fights against monsters. There's all these attempts to overcome the monster. Is this going to work? Is this going to work? Oh, it worked. Nope, it didn't work. They just continue to bully and oppress the humans.
And they can lure humans like the sirens with their call. They wreck your ship against the rocks by luring you in with a pretty voice.
They cause doubt, self doubt, doubt within bonds. They, divide and conquer with doubt.
They do. And they love to torment and to play with their food, basically. They're like a young predator playing with a mouse that it just caught or something. They want to have fun and enjoy because perversely, and this is part of what makes them monstrous itself, is that they get off on other people's pain. The monsters do.
Yeah, and when we're watching or, in a book or a play that has this, that can be a natural monster or a supernatural monster. They are tormentors. They are playing with their food.
Mhm. Monsters make threats.
The threat is so scary because the threat, they get you right in your vulnerable spot, whatever that is. That those, they're not empty threats ever. It's always the one weakness that the character has. The monster finds it and holds it over them. And humans do that to humans as well.
Another thing that monsters do that regular humans don't is eat people.
Yeah, obviously zombies are people eaters. I really like the first zombie eating in The Last of Us, but it's not with those undead. It doesn't stop with the eating. There's more going on there because of why they are undead. And that was really like took it up a notch.
I'm glad you mentioned The Last of Us because it also shows you that monsters don't necessarily have to be animal in character. It's the fungus that's really the monster that controls the dead bodies of the zombies. It's the fungus that is taking over the world and is the great threat to everybody who still lives on it.
In fact, in the pilot episode of the series, they talk about ergot, the fungus ergot.
Do talk about ergot.
Yeah, that was exciting. I was like, because I hadn't played the video game, so I went into watching that series really blind. And I was excited about that because I love zombies so much. I wanted to be surprised about everything. So I was like, oh, what are they talking about ergot for? Because at that point, you have no idea what has caused the zombie apocalypse on Earth.
Like,
Monsters are grabbers. And I was watching the Black Phone because Black Phone 2 is I'm going to be watching that soon. They call him the grabber, but they grab, and we can think of so many monstrous characters that harmed by grabbing, and humans. Being grabbed, it feels monstrous. Anyone who is grabbing, it feels like, oh, they must be a monster.
They grab and they take. And that's what Pennywise the Clown does. It's what's that guy's name? Snidely Whiplash, who's always taking the women and tying them up on the railroad tracks. He's grabbing and taking. He's stealing people.
Yeah. It's so many of these things that we're talking about are experiences that people have with humans. And so again, it just demonstrates that these fictional scenarios that we watch, it's a way for us to cope with what we're experiencing on this earth with those that are like us. Humans, we're all humans, but some of us are, doing the grabbing and the tormenting, and others are getting eaten.
Yes, that's such a good point that you bring up, that it's creating a monster is in part a transference of qualities that we don't like in humans onto something else, so that the humans are less scary in comparison. Because imagine if we went around and thought of all humans as monsters, because we all have these inherent qualities in us that we don't necessarily like, but that some people do act upon.
I want to talk about fear, just like another moment, how like exhausting it is. Because I think, all of this that we're talking about, I'm always thinking about the context of accusing innocent people of witchcraft. And those that are accusing, they are coming from a great place of fear and exhaustion. And I think one of the things that I want to remind people, seek out and understand those around you and scenarios around you, because if you can put down a little bit of that fear, it's restful. You don't have to exhaust yourself with the fear. I think that's a really important thing to remember about fear.
Yeah, that's really important. And just the way that we can isolate and ostracize and other people because we don't understand them. We aren't willing to take that step to get to know other people who come from different walks of lives. And we can monsterize entire classes of people based on our lack of understanding.
Yeah. People are dangerous because they're different. Danger lies in actions that harm, not in difference.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about part of this, but why do we need monsters?
We're trying to reconcile our fears, the roots of our fears, the threats that we have, the dangers that we have to move through to live life and enjoy life. I mean, life is roses, but it's also storms. You have both together, and monsters help us navigate.
They do. They help us handle traumas, anxieties. They help us to think about things that ordinarily are too scary to think about, to face our fears head on. That's part of the draw of horror, that you have a safe environment within you can confront your fears without any actual repercussions to yourself.
And then there's also not just confronting the fears, but confronting the possibilities. Like, what can I become? How bad can I be? What, how far can it go if these people are doing this? So, I mean, there's that aspect too, like finding those guardrails of how far, when do we need to stop ourselves and be like, whoa, 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 that would be monstrous of me.
Yes. And monsters, we touched on this a little before, but I wanted to just bring this up again. They teach us where our moral boundaries lie, because a monster, by definition, is something that is violating. It's violating our rules, our sense of order, our code that we live by. It's the things that we might have thoughts about, but we don't ever want to act on. It's that morality. It's a guiding light for how to, fit in and meet other people's moral expectations. I do want to circle back to something we pinned earlier,
Oh,
that
yeah. All right.
should pull the pin right back and read the note. What did we say? Well, should we label people as monsters, or should we avoid monsterizing people? So why do we do it in the first place? Well, we find their behavior is abhorrent. They're outside of that moral boundary that we established. And we dismiss people as being unredeemable and unable to be understood. We think, I can't grasp why anybody would do that. Why would somebody hurt a baby? Why would somebody hurt a grandmother? Any of these aberrations that a person that we end up labeling as a monster does. It's things that we find we can't understand because they're outside of the range of activities that we've engaged in our lives.
Yeah.
We don't know where they're coming from.
Well, you have to look at their humanity in the horror of what has happened. And I'll pick a spiritual and ritual abuse case. Generally, we find, unfortunately, here in the US, violent exorcisms ending the lives of vulnerable children or the elderly. We've talked about several examples that have happened this year in our country. We're not going to understand if we just say that was satanic, they're evil. We got to look at what was that person, what was the boiling point here? What are all the things that led up to this man harming his grandma? Because then we can learn how important it is to support our community members, our children, and our families, and make sure people aren't out on the margins, out in the frays, not getting the supports that they need, because it's humans in crisis. Now, I'm not going to say that's a blanket statement for every serial killer and atrocious, behaving human. Every instance is its own contextualized ordeal. But if we are looking at humans who are involved in crimes as humans, we can learn, how did we get here? So we don't get there with more people.
That is such a good point, because when you write somebody off as a monster, you cut off inquiry into, what were their motivations? What were they thinking at the moment that they did that? What got them to that point? Is there something, is there a mental health issue? Is there some other societal issue that we need to address to help people not go down that road?
The answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah. And, we need to be careful when we call people monsters, because we don't want to dehumanize and marginalize entire sectors of our society. We don't want to write off people. You don't want to say that kid that did that really wicked thing is a monster, or that kid is a bad kid. You want to stay with them and, show them the way to be good. You don't want to hunt monsters. You don't want to fight monsters, because when monsters are hunted, monsters are killed. And if we're making monsters of segments of our society, this is the road that we're leading ourselves down this hunter's path. Start thinking of them as prey because they're not like us. And if they're not human like us, then what's their life worth anyways?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking too, it is really critical to protect vulnerable people and children and communities from people who are causing harm. We can do that and support everybody. But it doesn't, too many children are being left in very dangerous situations. In interventions, we need to have the energy and funding and programs and expertise to support families where they're at and build them up. This was really fun. I so glad that monsters intersect with the important things that we're addressing every time. It's not fun to say, oh, this is very relevant, but that creative side of monsters and storytelling, it is important, and it's a big part of our popular culture, and it was great to get to talk about it. Be kind, be safe, inquire.
Don't label people. And have a great today and a beautiful monster-free tomorrow.